During the blood-soaked years of the American Civil War, there were many places that echoed with pain, fear, and loss, but few were as haunting as Camp Sumter. Better known as Andersonville, this Confederate prison became a living nightmare for thousands of Union soldiers who found themselves trapped behind its crude stockade walls. Disease ran rampant, food was scarce, and hope, that was often the first thing to die. But what was daily life really like for those prisoners? How did they survive or fail to? Stick around as we uncover the harrowing truths of life inside one of the most notorious prisons of the Civil War. If you're fascinated by dark corners of history like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started. Barefoot and naked prisoners struggled to survive. Many lives were lost at Andersonville, officially known as Camp Sumter. At the height of its overcrowding, it's estimated that around 100 prisoners died each day due to illness, hunger, and exposure to the elements. The conditions made it nearly impossible to maintain health or morale. Union Private Prescott Tracy, one of the men held captive there, offered a first-hand account of the hardships. He noted that clothing was in poor condition for nearly everyone. Footwear was rare, and only a small number had both coats and pants, typically those who had arrived more recently. Many prisoners were left with only partial clothing, and some had almost none at all. Shelter was equally scarce. Most prisoners had no form of protection against rain, sun, or cold nights. According to Tracy, the only available cover often came from makeshift tents, fashioned out of thin coats or scraps of cloth. But for the majority, even these basic materials were out of reach, leaving them fully exposed to the changing weather. These harsh conditions weren't the result of a single cause, but rather a mix of limited resources, overcrowding, and systemic neglect. Andersonville was originally built to house 10,000 prisoners, yet by mid-1864, it held over 30,000, creating one of the most tragic humanitarian crises of the Civil War. The only water was contaminated with sewage. At Camp Sumter, better known as Andersonville, approximately 45,000 Union prisoners were forced to rely on a single water source that flowed through the center of the camp. This narrow man-made stream served multiple purposes: drinking, cooking, and washing. Private Prescott Tracy, one of the prisoners held there, recalled that the water quality was extremely poor. He described it as dark in color, with a heavy layer of sediment that would settle at the bottom of any glass used to collect it. The problem was made worse by the camp's layout. Just beyond the stockade walls, the Confederate cookhouse was built directly upstream. Waste from food preparation, including spoiled materials and other refuse, was regularly discarded into the water, creating a visible, greasy film across much of the surface. Further upstream, Confederate guards also contributed to the contamination. According to historical data, large amounts of unsanitary waste were disposed of directly into the stream. Over time, it became less like a waterway and more like an open drainage channel. Despite these issues, the stream remained the prisoners' only source of water. With no access to alternatives, they had no choice but to use it for drinking and preparing what little food they received. These conditions highlight the severe neglect and lack of infrastructure at Andersonville, which played a significant role in the suffering experienced by those confined there. The camp was overcrowded and relied on mass graves. Private Prescott Tracy recalled his arrival at Andersonville with a sense of disbelief. As he entered the prison, he found himself among approximately 28,000 other Union soldiers already confined within the camp. He described the space as so overcrowded that simply walking in any direction was a challenge. Bumping into others was unavoidable. The extreme congestion, coupled with limited resources and unsanitary conditions, led to widespread illness and exhaustion. Many prisoners passed away quietly in the night or while resting during the day. The sheer number of these deaths became part of daily life within the prison. Union soldier Albert Harry Schatzel wrote in his diary about the grim regularity of it all. He noted that many men would go to sleep and never wake again, a quiet but heartbreaking end. On average, between 25 to 30 individuals were carried out each day by their fellow prisoners. Schatzel described how those who had passed were gently placed into prepared burial trenches. A simple board was then laid across the top before earth was added, offering a modest form of closure in an environment that offered little else. With thousands of deaths over just a few months, individual graves were not possible, and Camp Sumter Cemetery quickly became one of the most sobering symbols of Civil War captivity. POWs suffered from gangrene and other diseases. The extreme conditions at Andersonville took a heavy toll on the health of Union prisoners. As food became scarce, shelter remained inadequate, and sanitation broke down, illnesses spread rapidly among the overcrowded population. Dr. John M. Howell, who served as an acting assistant surgeon at the camp, documented the state of the men when he first arrived. He described them as barely recognizable, sick, frail, often lacking clothing, and resting on makeshift bedding, or in many cases, nothing at all. During his medical assessments, Howell noted that many prisoners were nearing the end of their strength. Some were expected to pass away within hours, others by the following day. He described one scene where a man was taking his last breaths while another beside him was already unresponsive. One of Howell's greatest concerns was the number of serious infections he encountered. Among them, cases of gangrene were especially alarming. The infection had progressed so far in some individuals that it had eroded tissue down to the bone. Howell admitted that no words could truly convey the level of suffering he witnessed firsthand. Union prisoner Ezra Ripple also remembered the fear surrounding these infections. Writing decades later, he recalled that aside from death itself, the thing most dreaded by inmates was gangrene. In particularly severe cases, surgeons had no choice but to remove the affected limbs. Ripple remembered how the exposed bone during these procedures would appear pale and gleaming, an image that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Medical support at Andersonville was deeply limited, and even trained surgeons could do little without supplies, space, or time. The accounts of Howell and Ripple highlight just how dire the health crisis had become inside the stockade, serving as a stark reminder of the cost of neglect in wartime captivity. Andersonville was hell upon earth. Union soldier Samuel J. Gibson, a prisoner at Andersonville, described the camp in deeply emotional terms. He called it a place of overwhelming misery and hardship, something he likened to the very limits of human endurance. As the weather grew hotter, conditions became even more unbearable. Gibson noted that the discomfort and suffering increased with each passing day. Among his small group of fellow soldiers, 3 out of 4 had fallen ill. With limited access to medical care or relief, their health continued to decline. Gibson kept a diary throughout his captivity. In its pages, he recorded not only the deteriorating environment, but also the painful loss of his comrades over time. Weeks later, he reflected on the full weight of what he had witnessed. "If this is not the worst place imaginable," he wrote, "then it must be close to it, a place just on the edge of total despair. I can only hope never to encounter anything more severe." Gibson's words captured the psychological toll that Andersonville had on its prisoners. His account stands as one of many first-hand testimonies that have helped historians understand the emotional and physical strain endured by those held within the stockade. The Confederates offered freedom. The roughly 45,000 Union prisoners held at Andersonville were sometimes offered a way out, but it came with a serious moral and emotional cost. Confederate authorities occasionally gave Union soldiers the option to secure their release by pledging loyalty to the Confederacy. Along with this oath, some were even promised financial incentives. Despite the extreme hardship, very few accepted the offer. Prescott Tracy, one of the prisoners, observed that even amid such intense suffering, most men held firmly to their convictions. He recounted the story of a fellow prisoner who sent a powerful message home to his mother. "My time here is taking a toll on me, Mother, but I face it with pride, for the sake of my country." Tracy's account, and others like it, reflect the deep sense of duty many soldiers carried, even in the face of unimaginable strain. For most, their loyalty and commitment to the Union remained stronger than the promise of comfort or freedom. The deadline kept POWs from escaping. Escaping from Andersonville was extremely rare for Union prisoners. Confederate guards had strict measures in place to prevent any attempts at fleeing. A key element of the camp's security was the deadline, a narrow boundary made of a wooden board nailed to waist-high stakes. This barrier ran around the entire perimeter of the prison. Union soldier John Levi Mayle described it in detail, explaining that guards were under strict orders to take immediate action against anyone who crossed or touched the line. According to Mayle, even a sick prisoner who accidentally leaned against the boundary for support could trigger a response. Sometimes, if a prisoner acted recklessly or out of desperation, the situation could escalate quickly. Because warning shots were not part of the protocol, stray bullets often endangered others nearby. This system served as a constant reminder of the strict control within the camp and the very limited options available to those imprisoned there. Confederate guards inflicted cruel punishments on the POWs. At Andersonville, discipline among prisoners was harsh. Those caught stealing from fellow inmates could be punished by being placed in wooden stocks or made to wear heavy chains as a form of restraint. The food situation was already dire, but it could become even worse. If even one prisoner was unaccounted for during roll call, guards sometimes withheld rations from the entire group, adding to the already extreme hardship. Union soldier John L. Ransom recorded a deeply troubling moment. He witnessed a fellow prisoner, ill, disoriented, and lightly clothed, walk slowly toward the camp's boundary. The guards, following standing orders, responded with force. The man collapsed near the edge of the camp. Reflecting on what he saw, Ransom wrote that perhaps the man had chosen a quicker end over the prolonged suffering he was already enduring. Given the conditions, the thought of another outcome seemed unlikely. This account offers a sobering reminder of how desperate life had become inside Andersonville and how limited the choices were for those who endured it. Lives were threatened. During the summer months, the heat at Andersonville made an already dire situation even more difficult. The prison grounds offered little to no relief from the sun, as nearly all vegetation had been worn away by thousands of weary footsteps. Union Private Ezra H. Ripple described the barren surroundings, noting the dry, dusty earth and lack of natural shade. To protect themselves, prisoners used scraps of fabric or clothing to build makeshift tents. Ripple shared how he and 8 others huddled in a small shelter, their feet stretched outward like the spokes of a wheel, each man trying to claim a sliver of shade in the oppressive heat. Fellow prisoner Albert Harry Schatzel focused on the overwhelming conditions in his diary. He wrote of the intense temperatures, the sandy ground, and the powerful odor that came from the lack of sanitation. Schatzel reflected that the air was so thick with unpleasant smells it was hard to breathe, and he struggled to imagine a place with greater suffering. These first-hand accounts revealed just how severe the physical environment was for Union prisoners at Andersonville, where even basic comfort was nearly impossible to find. The prison was tightly secured. Prisoners at Andersonville often searched for ways to regain their freedom. One method involved secretly digging tunnels beneath the prison walls, hoping to escape undetected. Union soldier John Levi Mayle recalled how men worked under the cover of night, using whatever tools they could find to dig quietly. During the day, they concealed the fresh earth by placing it in their pockets and letting it scatter around the camp as they walked. To further hide their efforts, fellow prisoners who were too ill to move lay across the openings to keep them from being discovered by guards making rounds. Eventually, Confederate officials took notice of these efforts and implemented measures to prevent future tunneling. Mayle described how enslaved laborers and teams were ordered to stack pitch pine logs just outside the main stockade. At night, the guards lit these wood piles, creating a ring of fire that cast bright light across the surrounding grounds. This made it much harder for anyone to dig in secret or move without being seen. While effective for the guards, the fires added to the hardship. The dense smoke from the burning pine drifted over the prison, especially during the humid nights of summer. Mayle reflected on the scene, describing how the thick smoke lingered over the camp, deepening the feeling of isolation and hardship in what he called a silent city shaped by illness and extreme deprivation. POWs had to bury members of their squads. When prisoners at Andersonville died, their fellow inmates were responsible for burying them. Union soldier Prescott Tracy described how the bodies were handled, noting that the prisoners performed the task under guard and with little time for reflection. 25 bodies were placed in a single pit without any markers, he wrote. The process, he observed, was done hastily, reflecting the grim reality of life at the prison. In some cases, prisoners received small rewards for performing this grim duty. Tracy recalled that some men were given a few sticks of firewood in exchange for their efforts. This, he noted, sometimes led to quarrels among the prisoners, who were so desperate that they would compete over the opportunity to handle the bodies. The desperation to escape the terrible conditions led some to take drastic measures. POW John Ransom described an unconventional method of escape where a man would feign death. A man pretends to be dead and is carried on a stretcher, left among the bodies, Ransom explained. Once the darkness of night fell, the dead man would rise and attempt to run away, hoping to evade the guard's notice. This account highlights not only the extreme lengths to which prisoners would go to escape, but also the dire and dehumanizing conditions that push men to such desperate acts. It also speaks to the profound psychological toll the prison took on its captives as they resorted to whatever strategies they could think of to break free from their suffering. Going to the medical tents almost guaranteed an inmate's demise. Between February 25th and May 9th, 1864, Andersonville's prison hospital saw 4,588 patients, with 1,026 of them succumbing to illness. Prescott Tracy, a prisoner who worked as a clerk in the hospital, gave a vivid account of the dire conditions. He described how, on many occasions, he would witness a collection of bodies waiting to be taken to the dead house for burial, alongside those who had died within the hospital itself. Tracy noted that the death rate in the earlier months had been around 30 per day. However, by the time he left, that number had risen sharply to an average of over 130 deaths daily. On one particularly grim day, the total reached an astonishing 146 deaths. The main causes of death in the camp were severe illnesses like diarrhea, dysentery, and scurvy. These diseases ravaged the prisoners, exacerbated by poor sanitation, inadequate nutrition, and the lack of proper medical care. The hospital, overwhelmed by the volume of sick and dying men, struggled to provide relief. This harrowing account paints a picture of the immense suffering and the unrelenting toll that disease took on the prisoners at Andersonville. POWs were fed starvation rations. At Andersonville, prisoners were provided with extremely limited and unappetizing food. Their weekly rations consisted mainly of cornbread made from ground corn cobs, along with only 4 tablespoons of rice. When meat was included, it was often spoiled pork that was both unappetizing and foul-smelling. Prescott Tracy, a Union prisoner, vividly described how the Confederates would drop the rations onto the ground at 4 p.m. each day. He noted that prisoners typically ate their entire ration in one sitting, as there was no guarantee that any food would be available the next day. Due to the unequal distribution, some prisoners might not receive their share at all. The hardships began long before the prisoners arrived at Andersonville. Tracy recalled that during a 5-day march to the prison, the Union soldiers were given barely any food at all. He shared that the total amount of food they received during the entire journey was only 13 crackers. This scarcity of provisions during their transport to the camp was a grim indication of the appalling conditions that awaited them. The food shortages, both on the march and at Andersonville, contributed to the widespread malnutrition and suffering experienced by the prisoners. These inadequate rations, compounded by unsanitary conditions, led to an increase in disease and death. This accounts for the severe physical decline that many Union POWs endured during their captivity. As we close the chapter on the grim and haunting experiences of those held at Camp Sumter, It's important to remember the sacrifices and suffering endured by these prisoners. Camp Sumter stands as a chilling reminder of the depths of human suffering during the Civil War, but it also serves as a call for remembrance, reflection, and respect for those who lived through these unimaginable horrors. If you found this glimpse into history compelling, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more captivating stories from the past as we continue to explore the darkest corners of history and the remarkable lives that shaped it.